Have you ever broken a bone?
Oh, yeah. A couple times, actually.
Okay, so if you have, you probably remember that, like, exact sequence of events.
Oh, vividly.
Right, there's the shock, the pain, the frantic trip to the ER or, the urgent care clinic. But there's this very specific moment of relief that happens, and it's not when they give you the painkillers.
No, it's when you see the screen.
Exactly. The relief happens when the doctor walks in, flips on that bright light box on the wall, and, or I guess pulls it up on an iPad these days.
Right, yeah.
But you look at that screen, and there it is, a stark, black and white, undeniable image of the fracture. It is clean, it's clinical, it is totally binary.
It's absolute objective proof of what's going on beneath the surface.
Yes. We love X-rays because they completely remove all ambiguity.
There's no room for interpretation when you are staring at a shattered radius bone. You don't have to, philosophize about it.
Right. And human nature is wired to want that exact same level of clinical certainty for, basically everything in life.
Oh, definitely.
We want an X-ray for our career choices to prove we're on the right path. We want an X-ray for our relationships, to prove we aren't wasting our time.
Yeah.
And perhaps most intensely, we want an X-ray for the spiritual life. We want the universe or God or whatever you want to call the divine to give us undeniable, high-contrast, black and white proof that we are not just spinning on a wet rock in a cold void.
We want a sign.
Yes, a big flashing neon sign.
Which is, it's why we usually associate modern communication, especially like radio or morning media, with noise.
Oh, absolutely.
It's an industry completely built on delivering those loud, startling signals.
Think about your typical morning commute. The frantic energy of a drive time show, the blaring sound effects, the rapid-fire headlines.
The anxiety of traffic updates being literally shouted at you.
Right, before you've even finished your first cup of coffee. It's an adrenaline injection designed to just agitate you into paying attention.
It's a medium that assumes you are asleep, spiritually, intellectually, physically, and its only methodology is to startle you awake with astonishment.
But what if you encountered an entirely different frequency?
Yeah.
Imagine stepping into the auditory world of a little broadcast we are depth diving into today. Suddenly, that frantic, anxiety-inducing radio dial just stops. The source material we have in front of us is a script from a very intentional morning broadcast, and the atmosphere it creates is so thick you can practically breathe it in.
It really is the absolute definition of an acoustic sanctuary.
I want to paint this picture for you, the listener, because the physical setting is vital to understanding the psychology of everything we are about to discuss today.
It sets the entire tone.
Exactly. So we are looking at the script for the Chesterton Radio Morning Prayer. The date on this is Monday, July 20th, 2026. It's broadcasting from a place called the Little Station on Commercial Street in historic Atchison, Kansas.
Which is such a great visual.
Right. And before a single human voice even speaks, the stage directions ask you to listen.
And what you hear is incredibly deliberate.
Yes. You hear the soft, rhythmic tolling of church bells ringing across the street from St. Benedict's Abbey.
Mm-hmm.
There is the quiet, warm, electronic hum of an old radio transmitter coming alive in the studio. Down in the distance, you hear a heavy freight train whistling as it rolls along the Missouri River. A robin is greeting the pre-dawn air. And inside this little booth, a vintage, glass on-air light glows this warm amber color.
Before we even get to the theology or the philosophy of this broadcast, we really have to recognize the psychological work happening in just those opening soundscapes.
Oh, for sure.
Think about the modern mind waking up. It is instantly fragmented. It is scattered across a dozen anxieties. Your inbox, the global news, the stock market, social media outrage.
You wake up already exhausted.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And what this broadcast is doing is pulling you back into tactile reality. The river, the train, the Abbey bells, these are deep, slow rhythms that exist completely outside of the broken news cycle. They anchor you.
And the host of this little station knows exactly who is listening. The script addresses you right out of the gate.
Yeah, it's very personal.
It acknowledges that you might be tuning in from the cab of a tractor out in the fields before the sun comes up. You might be on a commuter train heading into a concrete city. You might be in a workshop covered in sawdust or sitting in a sterile hospital room waiting for test results.
Or maybe you are just in your kitchen pouring coffee, dreading another ordinary Monday.
Right. And our mission today is to do exactly what this broadcast does. Hit pause.
We're going to unpack how this specific broadcast weaves together ancient psalms, the Gospel of Matthew, the philosophy of G.K. Chesterton, and the quiet wisdom of a Midwestern morning to answer one of the most profound questions of the modern age.
Which brings us back to the X-ray.
Right.
The core question we are exploring today is, why are we as a modern society so absolutely obsessed with demanding new signs, new proofs, and new wonders? And how has this endless addiction to astonishment completely blinded us to the miracles that are already happening right in front of us?
It's a critical diagnosis of our culture. This isn't just an analysis of first-century history. It's a mirror held up to our own deep underlying exhaustion.
To get to that diagnosis, the broadcast moves from the physical setting of the studio in Atchison to the spiritual setting of the morning itself. There is a premise here that the ordinary morning is a profound reality that we almost universally overlook.
Yeah, G.K. Chesterton, who the station is named after, actually insisted that the fact that the sun rises every single day is not some boring repetition. It is a theatrical encore.
I love that idea.
It's God saying, do it again to the sun every morning. And the broadcast leans into this by inviting all these different listeners, the farmer, the commuter, the patient, to join in the ancient prayer of the church, the liturgy of the hours.
And it begins with a phrase that has been whispered in monasteries for over 1,000 years.
Right.
O Lord, open thou my lips, and my mouth shall declare thy praise. Okay, let's unpack this, because if you aren't familiar with monastic traditions, this might just sound like, formal religious poetry. What is the psychological mechanism here? Why start the day with this specific sentence?
Well, think about the neurology of waking up. For most people today, the moment consciousness returns, cortisol spikes. You grab your smartphone from the nightstand. The very first thoughts that fire across your synapses are defensive.
What do I have to do today?
Right. Who was angry at me? What new disaster happened in the world while I was asleep? Your ego is instantly placed at the center of the universe, and it feels like it is under attack.
It's the ultimate defensive posture. I am bracing for impact before my feet even hit the floor.
Exactly. Now contrast that with the mechanism of this ancient prayer. O Lord, open thou my lips. You are actively interrupting the default mode network of your brain. You are decentering the ego. You are acknowledging, before you even speak your first anxious thought, that even the ability to form words, the breath in your lungs, the vocal cords vibrating, all of it is a gift that originates outside of yourself. It is a radical act of surrender before the day even begins.
The imagery the script uses here is stunning, too. It talks about the early sunlight just beginning to catch the pale limestone walls of St. Benedict's Abbey.
It's so vivid.
It roots this ancient eternal prayer in the very physical local geography of Kansas. But then it immediately launches into the Psalms. Specifically, it uses Psalm 94 as what it calls an invitatory, and then moves into Psalm 1 and Psalm 2.
Let's define invitatory really quickly for clarity.
Yeah, please.
In the tradition of the divine office, the invitatory is exactly what it sounds like. It's an invitation. It's the very first psalm prayed in the morning, acting as a gateway. It literally invites the mind and the community to step out of the secular world and into a sacred frame of mind.
And stepping into that frame of mind through these specific psalms, Psalm 1 and 2 sets up a massive, jarring contrast. The broadcast points out that these texts place two very different kingdoms, two different ways of existing right in front of the listener.
It's a brilliant juxtaposition. Let's look in the kingdom of human ambition first. Psalm 2 talks about how the Gentiles rage and the people devise vain things. It describes the kings of the earth standing up, the rulers gathering together to scheme, demanding their own way, plotting to break their bonds asunder.
Which sounds exactly like opening a social media app or checking the front page of a news site on literally any given Tuesday.
It is the perennial, inescapable state of human politics. It is defined by scheming, by noise, by power struggles, and by this desperate, exhausting need to control the narrative and control other people. It is a kingdom of pure anxiety.
But then, the script contrasts this chaotic raging with the quiet kingdom of God, illustrated beautifully in Psalm 1. It describes the person who delights in the law of the Lord as being, quote, like a tree which is planted near the running waters, which shall bring forth its fruit in due season, and his leaf shall not fall off.
Right.
The broadcast gives us a specific antiphon, like a short, repeating thematic chorus for this section. Happy the man who delights in the law of the Lord. His roots reach deeper than any storm.
The mechanism of that tree analogy is so crucial for modern listeners to grasp.
Okay, let's unpack this, because when I read that, I couldn't help but think about how easily I am thrown off balance in my own life.
Oh, same.
If I get a passive-aggressive email from a colleague, or if I see a terrifying headline about the economy, my entire day is ruined. I am completely blown over. Am I just distracted? Or is the text implying something worse about my roots?
The text is diagnosing exactly why that happens to you, and to all of us.
Mm.
If your roots, your sense of meaning, your identity, your emotional stability are only planted in the topsoil of the daily news cycle, or the topsoil of your immediate to-do list, or how many likes your recent post got, then any wind at all will knock you over.
Because topsoil shifts.
Exactly. It erodes. Yeah. The storm of a bad day or a global crisis will completely uproot you because you have no depth.
It's like pouring concrete on sand and wondering why the foundation cracks when it rains.
Precisely. The tree in Psalm 1 survives the storm not because it is immune to the wind, but because its root system has bypassed the volatile topsoil and tapped into a subterranean aquifer, the running waters. For the monks in Atchison, and for the listener tuning in, those running waters are the eternal truths of God. The broadcast is actively trying to pull your psychological and spiritual roots downward into that deeper soil.
And it does this practically, too, through repetition. Right after the Psalms, the source brings in the morning hymn, a classic called When Morning Gilds the Skies. The refrain is repeated over and over. May Jesus Christ be praised. It says, alike at work in prayer, the night becomes as day, when from the heart we say, may Jesus Christ be praised. Why this almost rhythmic repetition? Why chant this before you've even had your breakfast?
Because the tradition understands human psychology better than we do. It knows that we are creatures of habit, and that the human brain naturally defaults to a negativity bias. We scan for threats constantly.
Right.
But starting the day, forcing yourself to declare, may Jesus Christ be praised, before you face your emails, your commute, or your difficult boss, you are manually overriding that negativity bias.
You are filtering reality before reality has a chance to filter you.
Yes. The script notes that this practice takes the deeply mundane, the factory shifts, the endless laundry, the spreadsheet, and forces it through a lens of immense gratitude.
And gratitude here isn't just a warm, fuzzy emotion, is it?
No, not at all. It is a calculated spiritual weapon against despair. It declares that the powers of darkness actually fear this simple, sweet chant.
Okay, so we have built this incredibly stable, quiet, deeply rooted foundation. The peaceful morning, the Benedictine stability, the posture of gratitude. But then
It shifts.
the broadcast turns a hard corner into the gospel reading, and the whiplash is intense. We are dragged from the quiet beauty of the ordinary morning straight into the chaotic noise of a heated argument in first-century Judea.
The transition is so intentional. We move from the tree planted by the water straight into the storm of human scheming that we just read about in Psalm 2. We are introduced to the scribes and Pharisees in Matthew chapter 12.
Let's set the scene for the listener. Jesus is surrounded by crowds. He's been teaching, healing, and these religious leaders, the absolute academic elite of their day, walk right up to him and say, Master, we would see a sign from thee.
Now stop right there. How does that request sound to a modern ear?
Honestly, it sounds perfectly reasonable. If someone came up to me today and claimed to be the ultimate authority on human existence, let alone God in the flesh, I'd say, prove it. If a biotech startup claims their new AI can cure cancer, I want to see the peer-reviewed data. I want the clinical trials. Isn't it just basic, rational human nature to ask for evidence? Why is asking for a sign a bad thing?
That is the exact tension this broadcast wants us to explore. On the surface, the Pharisees sound like enlightened, rational skeptics just doing their due diligence. But look at how Jesus responds. He doesn't say, oh, sure, here's my resume. Let me do a quick miracle for you.
No, he responds with earth-shattering severity.
Exactly. He looks at these respected scholars and says, an evil and adulterous generation seeketh a sign. And a sign shall not be given it, but the sign of Jonah the prophet.
Calling someone evil and adulterous just because they asked for a little proof feels like a massive overreaction, unless we are missing the context of what was actually happening in that room. And the broadcast script introduces what it calls the paradox of the day right here. It says, the people who demanded a miracle were standing in front of one.
Context is absolutely everything here. To understand Christ's anger, you have to understand the history of what these men had already witnessed. The text provides a psychological breakdown of this moment. The Pharisees were not asking how to believe. They were asking whether they wished to believe at all.
Right. I want to read the list of events that led up to this exact confrontation because it completely changes how you view their request for proof. This is what they had already seen with their own eyes. Blind men receiving their sight, crippled limbs straightened, lepers people whose flesh was literally rotting restored to perfect health. They had watched demons flee in terror from a single spoken word. They'd seen thousands of hungry people fed from nothing. They had watched notorious sinners instantaneously turn into saints. They had seen the X-ray, the MRI, and the blood work, metaphorically speaking. The clinical proof was overwhelming. It was walking around breathing, speaking, and healing people right in front of them. So, after watching a blind man realize he can see the sky for the first time in his life, they cross their arms, look at Jesus, and say, "Can you do a trick for us? Show us a sign."
It exposes the sheer, unadulterated bad faith of their request.
It's the ancient equivalent of moving the goalposts. We see this on social media and in political debates every single day. If I am absolutely determined to hate you, or if I am deeply terrified that admitting you are right means I have to change my life, no amount of data will ever convince me.
Never.
You can hand me a stack of irrefutable evidence and I will just skim it and say, yeah, but what about this obscure other thing? Prove that.
That is exactly what is happening.
Yeah.
The demand for one more sign is a stalling tactic. It's a defense mechanism. The Pharisees chose to remain blind because acknowledging the miracle standing in front of them would require them to yield their authority. It would mean they weren't the smartest guys in the room anymore. It would require them to repent.
This brings us to a really uncomfortable question. When does our own desire for proof, whether we are demanding clarity in our careers, asking our spouse to prove they love us for the 100th time, or asking God to give us a sign about our future, when does that become nothing more than a disguised excuse for our refusal to commit? When does our skepticism become a shield to protect our ego?
The broadcast turns to G.K. Chesterton to unpack this exact psychology. Chesterton had a brilliant view on the nature of skepticism. He observed that the modern skeptic usually walks around imagining himself as a rigorous, hard-headed realist.
Right, like they're the only rational person left.
Yes. He thinks he's simply too intelligent, too rational to be easily deceived by ancient myths.
But Chesterton argues the complete opposite, right?
Yes. Chesterton points out that the skeptic is actually quietly demanding impossibilities. The skeptic is frequently impossible to convince, not because the evidence for faith or meaning is weak, but because the skeptic's conditions for belief are endlessly adjustable.
Endlessly adjustable. That is the perfect phrase. You think you are being objective, but you are actually rigging the game so you never have to lose control. The script captures this perfectly. It says, a miracle today merely requires another miracle tomorrow, and then another, and another. One sign is never enough for the heart determined not to surrender.
If Jesus had performed a spectacular magic trick right then and there, if he had pulled down a lightning bolt, the Pharisees would have found a way to explain it away. They would have said it was a trick of the light or demonic magic or some kind of mass hallucination.
Which is exhausting to think about. Imagine living your entire life that way, constantly scanning the horizon with a magnifying glass, looking for a reason not to trust anything.
It sounds miserable.
And the broadcast draws a straight, devastating line from this first-century Pharisaical skepticism directly to our modern cultural exhaustion. It sets up a brilliant, necessary distinction between two concepts we have entirely conflated today: astonishment and wonder.
What's fascinating here is that this might be the most crucial philosophical distinction in the entire deep dive.
So how does the text define the modern world's relationship with astonishment?
Well, it basically says that astonishment is the primary currency of the modern age. The world is built on the business of astonishing you. Every advertisement promises that your life will be revolutionized by a new soap. Every news headline claims the event is unprecedented and catastrophic.
Every tech CEO on a stage announces their new gadget as a paradigm shift for human evolution. We are relentlessly bombarded. Even our casual conversations start with it. What do you say when you see a friend? Did you see that crazy video? Do you see what that politician tweeted?
The broadcast states it plainly. We are addicted to astonishment.
And we have to look at the underlying mechanics of that addiction. Astonishment is inherently loud, and because it relies on novelty, it is inherently fleeting. It triggers a massive dopamine hit in the brain. But just like any substance, your tolerance builds.
Right. The slot machine mechanics of our technology. The first time you see a viral video, you are amazed. A year later, you can scroll past 10 miracles of human engineering on your phone while you're on the toilet, and you are just bored.
It takes so much more to impress us now.
Astonishment is fundamentally a consumerist emotion. It requires you to do nothing but be entertained by the spectacle. And because it fades, it simply asks for something louder tomorrow. A bigger explosion in the movie, a more shocking headline, a more controversial hot take, just to feel the same baseline level of engagement.
Which maps perfectly onto the Pharisees. They just watched a man's rotting flesh be restored, and they essentially said, cool, what else you got? Can you do it bigger?
Exactly. They were junkies looking for a stronger hit of astonishment. But wonder, the broadcast explains, operates on an entirely different frequency.
How does it define wonder? Because we use those words interchangeably. We say, I wonder what's for dinner, or that movie was a wonder. But the script treats it as a sacred posture.
Wonder is not about the volume or the novelty of the stimulus. It is about the internal posture of the recipient. The script says, wonder kneels, wonder listens, wonder thanks God. Astonishment leaves you feeling empty and wanting more entertainment. Wonder leaves you feeling small, but incredibly safe in a posture of profound gratitude and humility.
This is where Chesterton's famous concept comes into play. The broadcast quotes his idea that the world will never starve for want of wonders, but only for want of wonder. Let me unpack how the script phrases this. The problem has never been that God has failed to reveal himself. The problem is that we have become specialists at overlooking revelation.
That phrase, specialists at overlooking revelation, is chilling, because it is a learned skill.
It really is. Think about the smartphone again. You hold in your hand a piece of glass and silicon that can access the collected wisdom, art, and history of the entire human species instantly from anywhere on the globe.
It is a device that would have made King Solomon weep with envy.
Right. And what do we do with it? We complain when the Wi-Fi takes 3 seconds to load a video of a cat falling off a table.
We are surrounded by wonders, but our capacity for wonder has completely atrophied.
And if we connect this to the fictional world Chesterton created, think about Father Brown, his famous priest detective.
Oh, yes.
Father Brown solves mysteries entirely differently than Sherlock Holmes. Holmes looks for the spectacular clue, the rare ash from a specific cigar from India. Father Brown solves the murder because he notices the postman.
He notices the ordinary thing that everyone else's brain has filtered out.
Exactly. Father Brown possesses wonder, not astonishment. He realizes that the most profound truths are often hidden in plain sight, disguised as the mundane. The Pharisees were looking for Sherlock Holmes's level of deduction. Jesus was standing there like Father Brown, pointing to the reality they refused to see.
So, faced with this exhausting bad faith demand for a spectacular sign, Jesus doesn't play the game. He refuses to feed their astonishment addiction. Instead, he gives them something that must have felt like a slap in the face. He points them to the sign of Jonah.
It is a brilliant and incredibly provocative response, he says. For as Jonas was in the whale's belly 3 days and 3 nights, so shall the Son of Man be in the heart of the earth 3 days and 3 nights. Why is this such a provocative answer? We usually just think of Jonah as a cute Sunday school story about a guy and a big fish.
To the Pharisees, Jonah was not a cute story. Jonah was a story of a Jewish prophet who was sent to Nineveh, the capital of Assyria, the brutal pagan sworn enemies of Israel.
Right, they were literally the bad guys.
Jonah didn't want to go because he knew God would forgive them if they repented, and Jonah wanted them destroyed. So when Jesus brings up Jonah to these elite, nationalistic religious leaders, he is essentially saying, the only sign you are getting is the sign of the prophet who preached to your worst enemies, and your enemies actually listened and repented while you are standing here rejecting me.
It's a massive theological insult, but on a cosmic level, it's also pointing forward. He links Jonah's 3 days in the dark belly of the beast to his own impending death. The broadcast notes that at this exact moment in the gospel, the cross casts its long dark shadow backward across the room. Jesus is taking their demand for a cheap parlor trick and pointing them toward the ultimate gravity-altering event of human history, his own death and resurrection.
And the script unpacks the resurrection not just as a historical claim, but as a total paradigm shift for human existence. Listen to the theological weight the broadcast assigns to this. It says, the resurrection is the ultimate sign, not merely because Christ conquered biological death, but because, and this is a stunning phrasing, death itself has now become a doorway instead of a prison.
Wait, if that is true, it rewrites the fundamental physics of reality.
Completely. The script says that because of the sign of Jonah, every cemetery becomes temporary, every funeral becomes incomplete, every goodbye now waits for Easter morning. That is not a magic trick meant to entertain a skeptic. That is the remaking of the universe.
And because it is the remaking of the universe, it requires a foundation that does not shift. The host of the Atchison broadcast brings in a profound quote from Chesterton's book Orthodoxy to explain how we are supposed to react to this unmoving reality. Chesterton wrote, "It is always something to fall. There are an infinity of angles at which one falls, only one at which one stands."
The geometry of that metaphor is incredibly precise. Let's think about it physically for a second. If you are standing upright, perfectly balanced on a solid floor, there is only one specific vertical axis you can occupy. You are plumb. But the moment you lose your center of gravity, what happens?
You fall. And you could fall straight forward or backward or sideways. You could fall at a 42-degree angle or a 17-degree angle.
Exactly. There is literally an infinite number of trajectories for falling. But there is only one trajectory for standing.
How does the broadcast apply this physics lesson to our spiritual lives and our modern anxiety?
It argues that the modern world is obsessed with exploring the infinity of angles of falling. We chase every new spiritual fad, the newest self-help guru, the latest political ideology, the newest astonishing conspiracy theory. We think we're being open-minded and adventurous, but actually, we're just falling in different directions.
We are just tumbling through the air, mistaking momentum for progress.
Exactly. But faith, true faith, is maintained by standing upon the one thing that does not move, the historical, gritty reality of the cross and the resurrection. That is the one angle at which one stands. You don't need to frantically search for a new sign on a Tuesday if you are firmly planted on the sign of Jonah on a Monday.
This loops us right back to the Benedictine monks chanting Psalm 1 in the morning, the tree planted by the running waters. It stands upright. It doesn't blow away like dust in the wind of every new passing storm or demand for a sign. It has stability.
And that assertion of ultimate, unmoving authority through the resurrection links directly to the next shocking claim Jesus makes to the Pharisees. Having pointed to Jonah, he then turns his attention to King Solomon.
Right. Jesus looks at these scholars and says, "The queen of the south shall rise in judgment with this generation and shall condemn it, because she came from the ends of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon. And behold, a greater than Solomon here." We have to dig into the history here. Why Solomon? Why would mentioning him hit the Pharisees so hard?
To understand the sheer audacity of Jesus saying, "A greater than Solomon is here," you have to understand what Solomon represented to the first century Jewish mind. Solomon was not just a king. He was the absolute apex of human achievement. He represented the Golden Age. The text invites us to visualize his historical grandeur.
Paint that picture for us. What did Solomon's world look like?
It was sensory overload. Solomon built the first temple, a structure coated in pure gold. He had an ivory throne flanked by statues of lions. His courts were filled with imported apes, peacocks, exotic spices, and massive armies. His geopolitical influence was so vast and his reputation for intellect so immense that the Queen of Sheba, the Queen of the South, subjected herself to months of perilous, exhausting desert travel just to sit in his court and listen to him speak.
She crossed the desert for a chance to hear him, and the broadcast contrasts that magnificent cinematic image of Solomon with the visual reality of what the Pharisees were actually looking at when Jesus spoke those words.
Put yourself in the room. You hear the words, "A greater than Solomon is here." You look up, expecting to see a king in robes of state surrounded by armies. Instead, you are looking at an ordinary itinerant carpenter.
Yeah.
A man from Nazareth, a backwater town. He has no crown, no throne, no palace, no army, just dusty sandals, a weathered face, and a group of fishermen for an entourage.
But, as the text notes, this profoundly ordinary-looking man also happens to be the creator of the cosmos. The one who engineered the stars is standing there with dirt under his fingernails. I have to push back here, though. If you are God, why hide? Why not show up like Solomon, or 1,000 times greater than Solomon, and just force everyone to believe you?
Because if he showed up in overwhelming, blinding glory, he would only be commanding your fear and your astonishment. He would overpower your free will. By hiding his divinity inside ordinary human flesh, he forces you to engage with him through love and trust, not through coercion.
It requires wonder, not astonishment. And the tragic irony the broadcast highlights here is devastating. The Queen of Sheba crossed deadly deserts, risking her life to hear the wisdom of a flawed mortal king. Yet the scribes and Pharisees, standing face to face with incarnate wisdom itself, refused to even cross the room to truly hear him.
They demanded a sign because they were entirely incapable of seeing divine majesty when it was hidden in ordinary life.
It's a tragic blindness, and the broadcast does not let the modern listener off the hook. It pivots and aims this critique directly at us.
It really does. The script says, perhaps we are not so different. Sometimes we imagine holiness exists elsewhere. Think about how often we do this. We assume that if we are going to encounter God, it has to be on a mountaintop retreat, or at a massive conference with a celebrity speaker, or reading the perfect philosophical book, or in some miraculous viral moment.
We do exactly what the Pharisees did. We assume the divine is out there in the spectacular, and we completely ignore the fact that Christ is waiting for us exactly where he promised to be.
And where is that, according to the broadcast?
In the profoundly ordinary elements of your daily life. The script lists them out. In the quiet reading of Scripture. In the Eucharist. In the annoying neighbor who needs your help. in today's mundane work, in today's frustrating interruptions.
We are like the Pharisees, demanding a burning bush in our living room, while actively ignoring our child asking us to play or our spouse asking for a moment of connection. We refuse to cross the street.
It reminds me of the companion reading the broadcast uses from the prophet Micah. What doth the Lord require of thee, but to do justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with thy God? It doesn't say perform spectacular signs, it says walk humbly.
Which brings us to the absolute climax of this entire morning broadcast, the sanctification of the ordinary. Because Christ is greater than Solomon, but chooses to appear as a regular tradesman, it fundamentally alters how we must view the physical, boring world around us.
The broadcast argues that God's ultimate method of reaching humanity wasn't by rescuing us from the ordinary, but by entering and transforming the ordinary itself.
This is pure Chestertonian philosophy, beautifully integrated into the Atchison text. The source notes that Chesterton delighted in the ordinary, precisely because Christianity itself delights in the ordinary. Think about the historical reality of the Incarnation. God did not choose to redeem the world from a pristine, isolated, sterile marble temple.
No, he entered it through the dirt, the blood, and the smell of a stable in a politically occupied territory. And the list of things God sanctified by living a human life, according to the source, is incredibly poignant. He sanctified family dinners, village weddings, fishing boats, loud carpentry shops, dusty country roads, and cooking breakfast by a lake shore.
The script makes a statement here that I think should be written on every mirror. The gospel is not an escape from ordinary life. It is ordinary life filled with eternity.
That completely upends the modern search for meaning. We are constantly sold this lie that to find true meaning, we have to escape our mundane lives. We need a luxury vacation, a mind-altering experience, a radical career change, a viral moment on social media. But the broadcast is arguing that heaven is paying attention to an entirely different frequency.
Yes. The text spends a significant amount of time listing what it calls ordinary miracles. These are the antidote to the astonishment addiction. I think we need to look closely at this list because it is profound.
I agree. Let's walk through them. The script asks the listener to reflect on these moments. A child learns to pray. A husband forgives an old wound. An elderly woman quietly says her rosary. A farmer watches rainfall after weeks of drought. A nurse stays another hour after her shift. A mechanic repairs a stranger's car. A professor patiently explains a concept for the 10th time. A priest quietly hears confessions.
Notice what all of those actions have in common. None of them defy the laws of physics. None of them are signs from the heavens in the way the Pharisees demanded. But ethically and spiritually, they are profound, cataclysmic movements of grace.
Let's break that down. A husband forgiving an old wound that is literally a death and resurrection of a relationship. It defies human nature, which wants revenge.
Right.
A nurse staying another hour past a grueling 12-hour shift out of sheer compassion. That is a triumph over human selfishness. A farmer standing in the dust, watching the rain finally fall. That is a profound encounter with dependency and providence.
And as the text explicitly points out, absolutely none of these events will ever trend on a social media algorithm. None of them will be breaking news on a major network. They aren't astonishing enough, but the script says, heaven notices every one. Perhaps angels find these more astonishing than we do.
That is a beautiful reversal of perspective. We are bored to tears watching a mechanic help a stranger on the side of the road. The angels in heaven are in absolute awe of the charity and humility it requires.
The text provides the theological bedrock for why these ordinary moments hold such immense weight. It says that because God himself did not shout, but rather became these ordinary things, he became bread, wine, a helpless child, a grieving neighbor, a dying man on a cross. He forever changed their molecular spiritual nature.
And because he became these ordinary things, nothing ordinary can ever be merely ordinary again.
That is the thesis of the entire morning prayer. It means that every single mundane task you have to do today, washing a sink full of dirty dishes, answering a passive-aggressive email, sitting in gridlock traffic, fixing a broken pipe, is vibrating with eternal significance if you possess the wonder to see it. It has all been touched by the Incarnation.
That is the ultimate answer to the Pharisees' demand for a sign, and it is the answer to our demand for a sign. The sign isn't a parlor trick. The sign is that reality itself has been redeemed from the inside out. We don't need a new miracle to drop from the sky. We need the grace and the silence to recognize the miracle we are currently standing inside of.
As the broadcast from the little station on Commercial Street begins to wrap up its morning prayer, it moves into a final petition before sending the listener off to work. It asks God to keep us from demanding extraordinary proofs while overlooking ordinary grace. It asks for the faith to trust His promises before we understand His plans.
And it offers a summarizing thought to carry in your pocket through the rest of your Monday. It says, faith is not believing because there are enough miracles. Faith is discovering that Christ Himself is the miracle that explains everything else.
If you are endlessly weighing the evidence, acting as the ultimate judge, waiting for that one final, irrefutable X-ray that will force you to believe, you will be waiting forever. Because the skeptic's conditions are endlessly adjustable. True faith isn't the exhaustion of evidence. It's a relationship with a person who makes sense of all the other evidence in your life.
It changes the entire paradigm. Faith is no longer an intellectual puzzle you are trying to solve. It is a reality you are invited to inhabit.
Exactly.
Which brings me back to where we started. Do you remember the X-ray machine? How we expect spiritual things to be clean, visible, and binary, just like a broken bone on a screen? The Pharisees wanted an X-ray. They wanted undeniable clinical proof that required no relationship, no trust, and no change of heart. But what this text from Atchison reminds us is that you don't need an X-ray when the patient has already been fully healed. If a man who was paralyzed for 30 years is suddenly walking around the room carrying his bed, you don't ask to see his chart. You just watch him walk and you wonder at the miracle of the step.
Wonder, not astonishment.
Exactly. So I want to leave you, the listener, with a final, slightly uncomfortable thought to chew on today. We've explored the idea that the resurrection means death is merely a doorway, and that the ultimate sign of God is found in the quiet, dusty reality of ordinary life. So, what if our constant low-grade anxiety about missing out? What if our obsession with the next big political news story, the next technological breakthrough, or the next emotional high wired, what if that very anxiety is the exact thing keeping us from experiencing eternity right now? What if the very boredom, the very mundane routine you are trying so desperately to escape today is the exact place the creator of the universe is quietly waiting to meet you?
It's a challenging thought, but it is ultimately deeply freeing. It means you don't have to go searching across the desert like the Queen of Sheba. You just have to open your eyes to where you already are.
Well, just like the warm farewell from the host at the little station on Commercial Street in historic Atchison, Kansas, we hope this deep dive has helped you close your mind on something solid today. We wish you hot coffee, honest work, and charitable conversations. And remember, as the old on-air light dims, the open door is always on.